doesn't only give news, it inspires you to be the better version of yourself. Don't just fly, soar high.
Every nation on the planet, as I said.
Jane, should we be going down this more decentralized route, or does that run the risk of some countries introducing protectionist measures?
Well, I think Patrick is exactly right that, the food system now is global and it's all interconnected. And I think that actually we may find that people living in rural areas are better off than those living in urban slums. If you think about, slums, the kind of living conditions that many people, the poorest of the world, are facing, they don't have the measures that you would use to stop the virus, hand washing and social distancing, are just very, very difficult. They don't necessarily have clean water to cook their food with. But I'd just like to come back to, the example of Nigeria. I think it's very, very interesting to hear how the Nigerian government is really working to set up some kind of safety net and educate people and inform people as to what's going on. And for example, the World Food Programme, we're already acting to protect the people that we are helping already. And in Nigeria, we're helping about a million people a month. And what we're doing is sort of buying up food and giving people 2 months, or if in some countries 3 months supplies in advance, so that they can just get through these next few weeks and weather the storm. Because we don't know what's around the corner next, but we've got to be ready as far as we can in terms of the humanitarian response, setting up an infrastructure, recognizing that in many places there are no airlines running anymore, so we need to be able to fly in, help the World Health Organization, help other NGOs, help other governments fly in medical supplies. I mean, already since January, we've sent airlifts of medical kit and personal protection equipment to 86 countries. But you need an actual sort of infrastructure to set up the emergency response, to just get us through the next few months, and then have those safety nets, whether it's school meals for children, that now we're having to look at giving children's families takeaways because there's nobody in school. So it's like a classic emergency response, which is multiplied, and we have to live with the food system that we've got at the moment, and that is completely interconnected and globalized.
And Kabir, if things weren't bad enough already, we have the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization warning of new swarms of locust in East Africa. They'd already suffered with that earlier on in the year. There are now more on their way. And that's the way they deal with that is being affected because it's not possible to spray pesticides, apparently, or get them into the country. So how will that new outbreak affect food security there as well?
Well, like I said, the lockdowns and, the curfews are creating so much, problems that, government and, stakeholders have to, sit down and look at, to confront them, head on so that we can find, a solution, to it. I see the post-COVID, era, to be a transforming one in the sense that things will no longer be, the same. The smallholder farmer, for example, has suffered, a lot. He has seen how, you deprived, the daily needs, as a result of, this. So definitely things are going to change. The way the value chain and the supply chain is going to react to what has happened, is going to, make the system, more efficient. Programs like, the, FAO, and the rest, have a role to play, in coming out with, solutions to, some of these problems. But I can tell you that, African governments, particularly in Nigeria, they are so concerned. And, on daily basis, conversations are going on to see how these issues can be addressed.
And Patrick, do you think that what is happening now is going to be a severe enough of a shock to the system to give us this new way of distributing food, more adaptable and sustainable, that you want to see?
I hope so, because I think this is a fork in the road. It's one of these moments when we can either continue on the road we've been going down for the last few decades, which is persuading so-called developing countries to develop export markets for commodity food, often not very well paid for, quite low prices, to the developed countries such as the US and the UK and Europe, where there are markets for these foods, often at the expense of the food security of the exporting nation, and I would argue at the expense of the environment and the planet. And I think that the new road, which needs to be adopted by the FAO and all countries throughout the planet, is to recognize that actually there should be a form of protectionism, protection of the indigenous people and their staple food supplies. And that is an enlightened form of protection. And it should form the basis of all future international trade. Of course, there should be trade in food. I mean, countries like South Korea or Japan or the Yemen, who have a structural deficiency of being able to feed themselves, will continue to need to import food. But as a general principle, we should be as food secure and resilient as we can, nation by nation, region by region, and we need policies to encourage that, including the new trade deals which are going to come, for instance, in my country after Brexit. It shouldn't be a matter of just unfettered international trade. There should be restrictions.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we are out of time, ladies and gentlemen, but thank you very much to all of our guests, to Jane Howard, to Kabir Adamu, and to Patrick Holden, and to thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Australia's native fauna and flora are accustomed to bushfires, but this season has been unprecedented. Landscapes usually left unscathed have been decimated.
This bushfire season has burned through millions of hectares of land, destroying the habitats of many native animals. Some of these forests will take decades to regenerate, and others may never recover.
These baby kangaroos, or joeys, are orphans. They're now in care, but for many animals who do make it out of the fires, they soon face other problems.
They're vulnerable to cats and dogs and to car crash.
Australia's famed plants and animals are a strong part of the country's identity. Many of its species are found nowhere else in the world, and the extent of the damage isn't clear yet. For those who do survive, it's a long and painful road to recovery.
For 30 years, the Red Cross has provided a lifeline for Afghanistan's physically disabled. 101 East meets the remarkable people risking their lives to help the disabled in war-torn Afghanistan. On Al Jazeera.
A history of guerrilla warfare. A place on the global stage. The PLO gaining strength. Their revolutionary zeal knowing no bounds. But did a series of violent acts by their splinter groups damage the Palestinian cause or ensure its survival? Chronicling the turbulent story of the struggle for a Palestinian homeland. PLO, History of a Revolution, on Al Jazeera.
Be the hero the world needs right now. Wash your hands.
A sleeping giant, New York's desolate streets as the United States puts nearly $3 trillion into fighting the effects of coronavirus. Hello, I'm Nick Clark. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with extensive coverage of the pandemic, including Muslims around the world are urged to stick to social distancing guidelines at the start of the fasting month of Ramadan. We look at what's being done to keep students safe in Hong Kong while they sit their important exams. And Toy Love, Iran's Mr. Fix-It, and how he's bringing more than just dolls back to life. Well, the figures are just getting more mind-boggling by the day on how the coronavirus pandemic is affecting the world's biggest economy. And with yet another stimulus bill set to be approved by the US president, the government will have spent nearly $3 trillion as it deals with the economic fallout. The latest relief package was agreed to in Congress during 2 sessions with members standing apart and wearing face masks. It is the 4th aid package so far and will support small businesses. Well, the pandemic has made more than 26 million Americans unemployed in just 5 weeks. Trump, though, says the economy will bounce back quickly despite the number of cases and deaths continuing to rise. In some states, like Georgia, well, they're preparing to reopen their economies later on Friday.
Our economy will start to pick up very substantially as soon as the states get open, and that's happening as we speak, and it's actually very exciting, and people are just thrilled to see it, because our country has to get back to work. They want to get back to work. You see that, whether it's a demonstration or just in talking to people. They're going to get back to work, and they're going to get back to work very fast.
Jocelyn Jordan now, who has more on the millions of jobs lost.
4.4 million U.S. workers filed for unemployment last week, pushing the country's unofficial jobless rate to nearly 13%. It's more evidence the COVID-19 pandemic has damaged the U.S. economy.
If I no longer have a job, then that means no longer health insurance for me. And with my illness, I have to have, it's very important that I have health insurance because I have Crohn's disease.
Congress is voting this week to spend another $500 billion to help small businesses and hospitals. But when it comes to helping state governments reeling from the loss of business and personal tax revenues, the Republican leader of the U.S. Senate says that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I would certainly be in favor of allowing states to use the bankruptcy route. It saves some cities, and there's no good reason for it not to be available. My guess is their first choice would be for the federal government to borrow money from future generations to send it down to them now so they don't have to do that. That's not something I'm going to be in favor of.
The governor of New York State, who is a Democrat, called Mitch McConnell's comments outrageous.
Yes, airlines are important. Yes, small business is important. So are police and fire and healthcare workers, who are the frontline workers. And when you don't fund the state, then the state can't fund those services. Makes no sense to me.
What's more, New York's economy is the 3rd largest in the U.S. and in the top 15 worldwide, which means its survival as a financial and cultural center is key. And U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to suspend immigration for 60 days on economic grounds could hurt the U.S.'s ties with other countries. Indian officials are closely studying the order, since hundreds of thousands of their citizens, many who work for U.S. firms, could be affected. All that matters, though, to Connie Boyd in North Carolina is her own economic future.
Who say when we're going to go back to work? We don't know if it's going to be this year, next year, and they even specified our job. They just don't know.
The only certainty right now, the economic pain is worsening. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera.
Well, in Indonesia, the government has announced it will temporarily ban all air and sea travel until June to tackle the outbreak. The new measures come into effect on Friday, and that's the start of the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan. Despite government warnings of social distancing, many are still attending prayers. Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim nation.
Because, you know, this is our Ramadan worship. The holy reward is different if you pray at a mosque.
The key is not touching other people. So during the prayer, I keep distance with other people, not touching them. We take care of ourselves, so hopefully this way we can keep worshipping and avoid infection.
Well, with many countries facing lockdown restrictions, the pandemic is forcing some Muslims to change the way they observe Ramadan. Hashim Hawabara has more.
For hundreds of years, Muslims used to go out into empty fields, looking at the sky to figure out where Ramadan begins. These days, though, clerics here in Pakistan and elsewhere use telescopes to get first sight of the new moon. Once spotted, Ramadan starts. It's the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, when Muslims stop eating and drinking from sunrise to sunset. The fasting allows worshippers to devote themselves to their faith and remember the sufferings of the poor. But during the unprecedented coronavirus emergency, Muslims are abandoning many of Ramadan's traditions and rituals. They won't be able to invite their loved ones, the neighbors, or the poor to join the evening fast-breaking meal known as iftar. As COVID-19 spreads, restrictions are being enforced. Governments have closed borders, imposed curfews, lockdowns, and encouraged social distancing to contain the contagion. Islam's holiest site in Mecca is usually teeming with worshippers from all over the world during Ramadan. It's closed this year as part of the Saudi government's campaign to curb the virus spread. Getting people everywhere to observe social distancing in Ramadan won't be easy. The highlight of Ramadan is the Night of Destiny, where Muslims believe their holy book, the Quran, was first revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, and where the gates of heaven are open. Muslims spend the night in contemplation and prayers in mosque, a ritual they are being asked to perform at home this time. Islam's most sacred month, meant to encourage unity, praying together and breaking their fast together, may end up being a month of relative solitude. Hashim Ahbara, Al Jazeera.
Well, there are fears that infections in Pakistan could rise rapidly during Ramadan. The government has decided to keep mosques open, and people gathering to pray must follow social distancing measures. But doctors have urged the government and Muslim leaders to reverse that decision. For more on this, let's bring Kamal Haider in Islamabad. And Kamal, this is the thing, isn't it? To what degree will millions of worshippers follow through on the social distancing rules being asked of them?
Absolutely, and what we've been seeing is that the clerics who actually threatened the government that they would take matters into their own hands if they were not given permission, themselves are basically crowding, are seeing crowds gathering around them, and that of course blows all that social distancing out of water. But it is also important to note that the Pakistani medical associations, the doctors have warned and they've told the government that they're surprised that the government and the clerics have come to such an arrangement which could lead to an exponential rise in the number of cases. According to the World Health Organization, if preventive measures are not taken, if SOPs are not followed, Pakistan could have over 200,000 confirmed COVID cases by mid-July. So that is indeed a stark warning. People in Pakistan are saying that if all over the Islamic world people are staying away from the mosque because of the threat of this pandemic and the rise in the number of COVID-19 infections, why is it that the Pakistani clerics have got away with it, and why is it that the Pakistani government has actually allowed them to do this? Because this is indeed a ticking bomb. And also we are told that the Pakistani Prime Minister has now called an urgent meeting of all the provincial ministers. Now on that note, it should be remembered that Sindh province, where the Pakistan People's Party has a government, or provincial government at that, has actually enforced very strict lockdown measures. But across Pakistan there is this threat that this could all lead to more trouble.
All right, Kamal, leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much, Kamal Haider, there reporting from Islamabad. Thank you. Well, tens of thousands of students in Hong Kong are sitting important academic tests during the global pandemic. Strict health measures are in place to ensure that 52,000 people are safe. Students wore masks and had their temperatures checked. Schools have been closed for most of the year, with students learning online instead. And despite the precautions, some students say they're still concerned about the health risk. Sarah Clark has more from a testing centre in Hong Kong.
This is one of the 350 examination centres set up across Hong Kong where the final year secondary students are taking their final end-of-year exam. These tests had been put on hold, but the government gave the Education Bureau the go-ahead just last week after it decided that the number of coronavirus cases had been falling and it was safe to allow small groups to gather. Now, a number of tough social distancing measures have been put in place to avoid human-to-human contact for the students and the teachers who've also been trained to deal with emergencies.
We would like to try our very best to do whatever we can to make sure that the proper exam that they have been spent for 6-year preparation to be one of their memorable moments, no regret.
Despite the safety precautions that have been put in place, some students have told Al Jazeera that they're concerned about large groups gathering in one place due to the risk of an outbreak of the coronavirus. But if the government records a spike in the number of cases in Hong Kong, these exams will once again be put on hold.
China has prosecuted a citizen of Belize for alleged interference in Hong Kong's affairs. Hong Kong was the site of widespread pro-democracy protests last year. The man was accused of funding hostile groups in the United States. He's also facing allegations of colluding with foreign forces to interfere in the affairs of Hong Kong. Still ahead here on Al Jazeera, the biggest shipment in years of Saudi oil is on the way to the US, but it may not make it there. I'll tell you why. And as Venezuela's government celebrates its few cases of COVID-19, doctors ask if the numbers reflect reality.
Hello, we've got some quieter weather pushing into Spain and Portugal over the next couple of days. Down to the forecast, mind you. Down into the southeast of Europe, we've had some rain, we've had some snow over the Greek mountains. That's all pushing further eastwards, so we'll see the disturbed weather sliding across Turkey. Cyprus seeing some of the cloud and rain as well. Change all underway as well up into Scandinavia. We've seen temperatures in Stockholm recently getting up to 17, 18 degrees. We'll have a high of around 11 Celsius on Friday. Northerly winds tucking in here, so always turning a little cooler. And that cooler air will sink down across a good part of northeastern Europe over the next couple of days, but largely dry for the time being. A few showers there into central parts of France, some showers across northern parts of Spain over towards Portugal, and these showers becoming a little more widespread as we go on into Saturday. By Saturday, showers there into central areas of France as well. Some wetter weather as our system makes its way down across Ukraine, through Poland, western parts of Russia. Down towards central areas of the Med, it is generally dry and fine. The eastern side of the Med too, not too bad. We've got this area of cloud spilling over towards the Levant. Another area of cloud into northern parts of Morocco, and that's going to bring increasing rain here as we go on through the weekend.
As the world battles the coronavirus and millions of infections.
Staff have tested positive for the coronavirus.
With countries in lockdown and the threat of a major economic crisis.
The cumulative loss to global GDP could be around $9 trillion.
We'll bring you the latest developments from around the globe.
Prosecutors say they're also seeing price gouging on vital medical supplies.
Coronavirus pandemic. Special coverage on Al Jazeera.
My life is so
Hello again, you're watching Al Jazeera. A reminder of our top stories this hour. And the US government will be spending nearly $3 trillion to respond to the coronavirus pandemic. It's after politicians and the House of Representatives passed another $484 billion in relief. Muslims around the world are beginning to mark the first day of the fasting month of Ramadan, with countries facing lockdown restrictions because of the outbreak. Many communal practices are being done in seclusion. Strict health measures are in place as 52,000 students in Hong Kong sit important academic tests. Students are wearing masks and had temperature checks. Schools have been closed for most of the year. All right, as oil producers cope with volatility because of an abundance of supply and low demand, the biggest Saudi oil shipment in years is making its way to the United States. But US politicians are calling for the tankers to be turned around, with domestic oil storage expected to be filled up soon. And there are reports that the kingdom is exploring where those tankers can be sent if Washington does ban them. John Hendren has this report.
A flotilla of Saudi oil tankers is slowly steaming toward the United States and into a chilly welcome for a U.S. ally.
It's indicative of how desperate these petrostates are to sell their oil, to find a place, physically, to find a place to place their oil.
With the coronavirus driving oil prices to historic lows, all U.S. oil storage is expected to be filled in the next month. The Saudi move to occupy much of that precious storage space on the U.S. Gulf Coast has been called by some industry insiders an economic Pearl Harbor, a hostile attack on U.S. soil. A coalition of 13 U.S. senators from energy states goes even further, calling it economic warfare. Texas Senator Ted Cruz writes on Twitter, 20 tankers filled with 40 million barrels of Saudi oil are headed to the U.S. This is 7 times the typical monthly flow. My message to the Saudis, turn the tankers the hell around. Cruz says the longtime U.S. ally is exploiting a pandemic to kill the rival American shale oil industry. Some analysts say he's right.
What is Saudi Arabia rightfully doing, as any other oil producer, is to get rid of the competition. And competition in this case is expensive oil. It's shale oil, means expensive to produce.
U.S. leaders have long nurtured strong bonds with Saudi leaders, even since the rise of shale oil helped the U.S. overtake Saudi Arabia as the world's largest oil producer.
$3 billion.
The fact that Saudi leaders are now willing to risk the anger of their American allies suggests they believe the world's oil glut won't end anytime soon. With much of the world on lockdown, few drivers on the road and fewer planes and ships are using fuel. Oil prices are so low they briefly hit negative territory this week at the Chicago Board of Trade. That left some sellers actually paying buyers to take it off their hands. Now many producers are simply storing it and waiting for prices to rise. The U.S. can hardly turn the ships away. The Saudi government owns the Motiva oil refinery in Port Arthur, Texas, America's biggest.
It can choose what crude that Motiva refinery takes. And, at times when it's tough to market oil, you might as well just buy your own oil.
Even as American politicians lament the Saudi incursion, the ships sail ever closer. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Chicago.
Let's move on to Brazil, which is reporting its highest single-day death toll, with 407 people dying from the virus, and that takes the total to more than 3,300. At least half of those are in the state of Sao Paulo, Brazil's epicenter for the pandemic. President Jair Bolsonaro has dismissed scientific advice and has led a number of anti-lockdown protests. While cases in Ecuador, they've nearly doubled to 22,000 after a backlog of tests were analysed. It's now the second worst hit nation in the region after Brazil. The government has begun storing bodies in refrigerated containers as morgues fill up. Ecuador has nearly 600 confirmed deaths. And hospitals in Peru are increasingly strained after cases surged past 20,000. That's double the number of last week. Bodies have been kept in hospital hallways, and health workers say they're being forced to reuse masks. But in Uruguay, a decline in the number of infections has seen some schools reopening in rural areas. They'll be closed for a month. Attendance will not be made mandatory. Venezuela says that robust testing and tough lockdown measures have led to one of the lowest rates of coronavirus in the world. There have been just over 300 cases in a country of 29 million people. But some doctors warn the numbers are being drastically underreported. As Teresa Bow now reports.
Daisy Morales sells food on the streets of Katia, a working-class neighborhood in Caracas. The ongoing economic crisis and the lockdown are having a big impact in her life.
We are only working 3 hours a day. I understand they are doing it to protect our health, but I'm a single mother of 2 children, and my eldest daughter and her son also live at home. I think the situation will get worse every day.
Security forces on the streets are trying to enforce a lockdown to prevent the spread of COVID-19. that people are becoming more and more desperate every day. On Thursday, reports of looting and clashes with security forces in several states around the country show how dire the situation is. COVID-19 may generate fear among people, but surviving every day is the main worry for many. Government figures show that Venezuela has around 300 confirmed cases of COVID-19. President Nicolás Maduro says the country has tested over 200,000 people with the help of the Chinese government.
That is the medium-term goal. We have to reach 1 million tests. At this stage, we've carried out 250,000, but we have to reach 10 million tests to comply with the complete protocol of the World Health Organization.
There are two types of testing being done: the PCR, that tests the virus genetic material, and the rapid tests, that are less sensitive than the PCR. That's why doctors like Julio Castro say the virus may be severely underdiagnosed in Venezuela.
Limitation of the amount of tests prevents you from doing lots of them, but it may be greatly underreported. What we think the government is doing is mixing PCR tests and rapid tests. You cannot mix pears with apples. The numbers reflect different things.
Venezuelan hospitals are already struggling with shortages of almost everything. Only 70% of them have running water and soap. We spoke to Oscar Navas, a doctor in the state of Anzoátegui. He says he supports the call by opposition leader Juan Guaidó to pay extra money to healthcare workers that fight COVID-19.
A doctor like me gets $1.50 a month, and that's why my interim president, Juan Guaidó, will use some resources to give $100 a month to those who qualify and work in the health sector. The money comes from accounts that have been recovered from the government and will be paid as virtual money for 3 months.
Venezuela's healthcare system is already stressed to the limit. The spread of COVID-19 can easily make it collapse. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera.
The World Health Organization is warning the number of malaria deaths in Africa could double this year. Anti-malarial campaigns and the distribution of insecticide nets and medicine have been disrupted by coronavirus lockdown measures. WHO is urging governments to keep up the fight against malaria or risk seeing the worst death toll in 20 years. South Africa's president says he will gradually ease a nationwide lockdown starting early next month. Cyril Ramaphosa says some parts of the economy will be allowed to reopen and has called on people to start wearing masks outdoors. He says strict quarantine restrictions will be lifted slowly to reduce the risk of a spike in infections. Strict lockdown measures in the Philippines have been extended until the middle of next month to contain the spread of the virus. The quarantine moves will continue in the capital, Manila, until May the 15th. The restrictions will be eased in low-risk areas. The president, Rodrigo Duterte, has threatened to impose martial law after 2 soldiers escorting aid to villagers were killed.
If the lawlessness continues, killings here and killings there, and it's happening all over the Philippines, maybe I will declare martial law because NPA fighters are primarily grabbing help intended for the people, plus supplies and food meant for them. I'm warning everybody and putting the armed forces and the police on notice that I might declare martial law. There will be no turning back.
The United Nations says Israel's plan to annex parts of the occupied West Bank violates international law and deals a devastating blow to a 2-state solution. The comments at a Security Council meeting follow the US Secretary of State saying it was up to Israel's new government to decide whether to do it or not. Our diplomatic editor James Bays has this report.
Israel's new coalition government, a deal between Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, means the possibility it will annex parts of the West Bank is now much more likely.
I now give the floor to Mr. Nicolai Mladen.
In a virtual session of the UN Security Council, the man in charge of Middle East peace efforts for the United Nations said that would be a disastrous step for peace in the region.
Mr. President, the dangerous prospect of annexation by Israel of parts of the occupied West Bank is a growing threat. If such a move were implemented, it would constitute a serious violation of international law, deal a devastating blow to the 2-state solution, close the door to a renewal of negotiations, and threaten efforts to advance regional peace.
The Palestinian ambassador Riyad Mansour made it clear it was time for an international conference on the Middle East.
The international community must repudiate and demand a halt to all annexation measures. Do not fall prey to the pretext crafted by Israeli officials, now the excuse of the pandemic, to divert attention from these crimes.
His Israeli counterpart, Danny Danon, said while his country had been helping Palestinians during the COVID-19 outbreak, the response had been what he described as hate and anti-Semitic incitement. One Security Council member, the ambassador of Indonesia, told Al Jazeera in an interview that Israel shouldn't be contemplating illegal action at any time, but especially not during a pandemic.
It becomes a double jeopardy, meaning the issue of occupation, and there's also an issue of COVID pandemic. So I think the international community has to ensure that there are all the necessary assistance, the necessary humanitarian assistance, and also to ensure also that the occupying power complies with the many UN resolutions.
It's pretty clear among the Security Council the US is the only country that would not object to Israel annexing part of the West Bank. However, can the other members of the Security Council take any action to stop it? Well, the US is a permanent member, and almost certainly it would block any resolution using its veto power. James Bays, Al Jazeera, at the United Nations.
Getting a new toy can be a source of joy for a child, but in Iran, economic sanctions are making it harder to get consumer goods. So one man is doing his best to put a smile on children's faces. Zain Basravi has more from Tehran.
In downtown Tehran, there is a small shop where the pieces of broken toys are put back together again. Where giving new life to old things has been a family tradition for nearly 50 years. If you or someone you love have a favorite toy that needs fixing, there are people here who are able to help.
This doll belongs to my daughter. Thankfully, they repaired it because it was very expensive. We're under sanctions and it's a Canadian product. If we could send it back, they would have exchanged it with a new one. But here, we have to bring it to be repaired.
Many of the toys that come through the door have sentimental value for the owner, but sanctions have made good quality toys hard to come by. What is available is expensive, so Iranians also find it cheaper to repair than replace.
We enjoyed giving a life back to something that is broken, and it gives you a good feeling.
The Khalegi brothers are often the first to see the broken toy. They say there is no manual for this kind of work. Older toys, mostly mechanical, are easier to fix. Newer ones require a working knowledge of electronics, circuitry, online research. Spare parts they can't buy, they make in-house, whatever it takes. Disappointing a customer does not seem to be an option.
Now we're on our way to meet the man who started it all, the original toy doctor of Tehran. He's in his 70s now, and because of the coronavirus, he doesn't come into the main shop anymore. His sons handle the front end of the business while he continues to repair children's toys from his workshop at home.
Sabah Khalegi began his career at his father's workshop in Iraq. He opened his own business after his family moved to Iran in the 1970s.
My father used to repair gramophones. As a kid, I always spent my time with him. I used to see the mechanical movements of the gears, and I loved them. I used to buy broken toys and repair them, and my father helped me fix them. Seeing a girl or boy happy when their toys are repaired brings me joy.
This room in a small house in Old Tehran is a sanctuary for lost and forgotten toys. Once perhaps a child's favorite thing, now a little worse for wear. But on Sabah's table, they all get a second chance. His work, he says, requires patience and creativity. And from gramophones to aerial drones, 3 generations of the family business is a reminder. What is broken can be fixed. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
All right, time for an update of the headlines here on Al Jazeera. And the United States government will be spending nearly $3 trillion to respond to the coronavirus pandemic. That's after politicians in the House of Representatives passed another $484 billion in relief. More than 26 million Americans have filed for unemployment in just 5 weeks. But President Donald Trump expects the economy to rebound.
Our economy will start to pick up very substantially as soon as the states get open, and that's happening as we speak, and it's actually very exciting, and people are just thrilled to see it, because our country has to get back to work. They want to get back to work. You see that, whether it's a demonstration or just in talking to people. They're going to get back to work, and they're going to get back to work very fast.
Muslims around the world are marking the first day of the fasting month of Ramadan. With countries facing lockdown restrictions because of the outbreak, many communal practices are being done in seclusion. Strict health measures are in place as 52,000 students in Hong Kong sit important academic tests. As students are wearing masks and had temperature checks. Schools have been closed for most of the year. Hong Kong has more than 1,000 cases and has reported at least 4 deaths. Cases in Ecuador have nearly doubled to 22,000. It's after a backlog of tests were analysed. It is now the second worst hit nation in the region after Brazil. The government has begun storing bodies in refrigerated containers as morgues fill up. Ecuador has nearly 600 confirmed deaths. Hospitals in Peru are increasingly strained after cases surged past 20,000. That's double the number of last week. Bodies have been kept in hospital hallways, and health workers say they're being forced to reuse masks. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has threatened to impose martial law after 2 soldiers escorting aid to villagers were killed. Stricter lockdown measures in the Philippines have been extended to the middle of next month to contain the spread of the virus. South Africa's president says he will gradually ease a nationwide lockdown starting early next month. Cyril Ramaphosa says that some parts of the economy will be allowed to reopen and has called on people to start wearing masks outdoors. Tens of thousands of troops have been deployed to enforce restrictions. You're up to date with the headlines. You've got more news here on Al Jazeera right after the stream. See you then. Bye for now.
Talk to Al Jazeera. We ask
what your thoughts were when you saw that document for the first time.
We listen.
After the World War, saying, you Europeans go and build the United States of Europe, but we will not deal with you.
We meet with global newsmakers and talk about the stories that matter on Al Jazeera.
Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream, Home Edition. Welcome to my house. Today I should be asking you what's in the show, because this show is a Q&A about the coronavirus and sub-Saharan Africa. We've had your tweets in already. Thank you very much for those. We're also on YouTube, so just jump in the YouTube chat, ask your questions, and you can also be in the stream's conversation today. I want you to meet the panel. I think you're going to be impressed. Dr. Regina, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Regina Osi. I am an infectious disease specialist, and I work in Johannesburg at the Orem Institute. I work mostly on TB and HIV.
Hello, Dr. Michelle.
Hello, I'm Dr. Michelle Liao. I'm Program Manager for Emergency Response, WHO Africa.
And Mohammed, please introduce yourself. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you. My name is Mohammed Yahya. I'm the representative for United Nations Development Program in Nigeria, based in Abuja.
So, guess there was a headline that really jumped out at us at the stream, and that headline is on AlJazeera.com. Africa coronavirus cases could hit 10 million in 6 months, and that figure comes from the WHO. I'm going to go straight to the question, guess. The first question from Twitter, make you work straight away, and it comes from the real Savanch Trivedi. Thank you very much for your question. And the real Savanch says, if states and disaster preparedness agencies engaged in crisis simulations and ground-proof their plans, would we be in a basically a better place to tackle this global pandemic? Let me put that first to Mohammed. What's your take as somebody who really cares about development on the continent?
Thank you. Well, I think there's an African saying that says you can only kill a snake with a stick you have. Essentially, in the continent and in Nigeria, where I am, the governments are facing triple whammy, essentially. One is that you have a global recession that COVID has endangered. Second, you have a COVID public health response that is making the economic situation of people much worse, and I'll come back to that. And then the third part, which the question relates, is the government's ability to respond is much more constrained because of the oil prices. So many African governments, not only in Nigeria, rely on one commodity, and that exposes them to fluctuation. And in the case of Nigeria, the projection is the government has lost about 10 billion, even more from the 2020 budget. So its ability to respond is much more limited. So yes, disaster systems that are in place can be extremely helpful, but I think it's not straightforward. The ability to respond is very much limited by the economic condition that the country is in.
Dr. Regina, just jump in there. Go ahead.
Yes, I think that preparedness is really important, but I think, as Mohammed said, it is very difficult for countries that are contributing sometimes 1% of their GDP to health to be able to actually have a budget that will allow for preparedness as well. So usually you prioritize what you can prioritize. We have a lot of HIV, we have a lot of TB. So governments are prioritizing those things in primary healthcare and trying to reduce maternal mortality. And therefore, they're not really focused on some of these preparedness exercises, which as much as they could, like stockpiling and all of the other things that could be.
Let me go to YouTube, and Bonnie M is on YouTube. I'm going to bring you in, Dr. Michelle, here. Bonnie M says that there is very little testing ability in sub-Saharan Africa with 2.6 million people. I assume 6 million swabs have been used. How many countries are actually producing the tests? What does it cost? Dr. Michelle, can you get us up to speed with testing?
Thank you very much. About the testing, unfortunately, in African continent, we are not manufacturing these tests. So we have 2 laboratories, and my colleague in South Africa can confirm. The lab in South Africa, that is a reference lab, and we have the laboratory in Senegal, and both of the labs are equipped. Some of them, in collaboration with other laboratories, can start producing. I know that there is some rapid testing process in Institut Pasteur in Dakar, but except those 2 who could have capacity, there is no lab elsewhere, at least in the sub-Saharan African countries, that can produce. And this is one of the critical challenges that we have to make available this lab equipment and reagent that is lacking also on the international market.
Go ahead, Dr. Regina.
Yes, so I think that that's true, but we also have a platform called the Gene Expert, which is a platform that was put in place for TB diagnostics. And the company that makes it has created a cartridge that can be used for SARS-CoV-2. So hopefully countries in Africa will get that at an access price that is reasonable so that they can use their existing platforms, which are kind of distributed in sort of the lower level facilities, not in central labs, to be able to test for SARS-CoV-2 as well.
So the stream spoke earlier this week to Andrew Wetitu. He's the CEO of Safe Hands Kenya. And what has happened in Kenya is a number of companies got together to work out how can we provide some essentials for people who are living in informal settlements.
What Safe Hands Kenya is a mission-driven alliance of close to 30 companies that are present here in Kenya, looking at rapidly providing sanitation products, including soap, sanitizer and surface disinfectant, and masks to each and every individual in these informal settlements. We are looking to do this at scale quickly in order to be able to address and manage the spread of COVID in Kenya.
So what I'm really curious about, Mohammed, is the kind of innovation, the kind of grassroots effort that either private companies are doing or private citizens are doing that you've seen.
The innovation I'm seeing actually is not an innovation per se, but it's solidarity. It's something that I see, especially for people impacted informal sector. You probably know most of Africans' GDP, and in case of Nigeria, more than 60% is the informal sector. There are people who are bearing the brunt of the public health response, especially when it comes to lockdowns. They're the ones who have to look for or live in what they call a hand-to-mouth situation. So what we're seeing, which is really amazing, is the country getting together and private sector individuals. And in the case of Nigeria, I see a lot of Nigerian Nollywood and actors and a lot of musicians getting together to help people in the informal sector. Because essentially, I hope we'll come to this specific question on how do you balance public health in a context of informality, and how do you ensure that we have a context-based public health response in Africa that is actually very much in line with our capacity and our realities. And some of the things that we're seeing may contradict that, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to discuss that, how that could be done.
All right, so Mohammed, you want to discuss it? Go ahead and do it right now.
So I hope Dr. Regina, Dr. Michelle also come in. But one of the things we are seeing is that Africa needs its own public health system that is based in a context that cushions against the poorest. And I say this because lockdown.
Do you want to give us an example? Because we have these big themes, okay, and I hear this a lot about this is what the continent should be doing. But how do you do it? Just very briefly, give me an example. Give us an example of what that actually means.
So, and I'm happy to give you the examples, but just to say there is no easy answers, because on one hand we tell people social distancing is extremely important to control the virus. We say isolation and issues around ensuring that most people are not with each other is important. But in reality is many of the African communities in the continent live off through connecting with people. Mm-hmm. So, and in the case of Nigeria, they even have residential areas called face me, I face you. Essentially, people can't get off from each other. So how do you do that? And how do you do social distancing in an IDP camp? So this is the reality. So Mohammed,
we have a lot of questions coming in. I take your point. I'm gonna reel the questions in because we have so many. So this is really interesting, and this is talking about some of the ideas that are going around the continent and may not be accurate. The experts say the virus cannot survive under 26 Fahrenheit. This comes from Walia Raja, Dr. Michelle. You can answer this one. Most African countries are experiencing extremely hot temperatures currently. African countries are recording cases that contradict the expert claim. Why? So basically asking about temperature and where the coronavirus actually does most damage, and is Africa safe, because lots of Africa is quite warm.
The fact is related to how the contamination is occur, and it's mainly through droplets, sneezing or coughing. So it's you being in front of somebody less than a meter in front of you, and receiving the droplet and the person being contaminated. So in this situation, the temperature cannot act on this or prevent having. Maybe what they are talking about is having the virus on the surface that can be dry, and then the virus be inactivated. But we should recall that also some of the respiratory infections are occurring in Mediterranean region that is even further more hot than in Africa. So it's not a kind of factor that can prevent or slow down the transmission.
I'm going to go to Twilo. You go ahead, Dr. Regina.
The virus is actually denatured around 56 degrees Celsius. So I think that's a myth that's been sort of propagated, and we should sort of move away from that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to Twilo, who's in South Africa and on YouTube. Thanks, Twilo, for your question. And Twilo says that I'm in South Africa. We're doing okay here, but the lockdown is quite stressful. A lot of people are struggling. And that's a theme that Bapu Melele, who is a pastry chef student in South Africa. I would love to be on lockdown with her. because the food is going to be great. But she also makes a much more important point about food and lockdown, is that if you're on lockdown, there are some times where there'll be people in the community who cannot stay at home. It is not possible. If they stay at home, they will starve.
Donations have been made with regards to the Solidarity Fund and, of course, everyday people donating what they can towards people who don't have much. But not enough is being done in helping out the everyday man. What will get people first, the hunger or the pandemic? At this rate, communities don't care. They need food and they need it now.
Dr. Regina, this
yes,
is something that you can appreciate. Dr. Regina, you take this one because it's a South African specific question.
Yes, I think this has been a big struggle, and the government has tried to sort of balance the need for isolation and lockdown with the need of the people. As you know, our president announced yesterday a massive stimulus package of 500 billion rand. A lot of it is going to go to unemployed people. A lot of it is going to go to food packages and to create economic relief. It is very clear that the continent, and South Africa in particular, is going to pay very dearly for this coronavirus epidemic, but also that individuals are really struggling, and we have to figure out how to be have more solidarity. There are lots of food package distributions. There's a solidarity fund that's been created where people can access different things, and I think it's just about educating and communicating with the public to make sure that they know where they can go so that they don't stay at home and starve.
Dr. Michelle, I want to give this one to you. Again, it's on YouTube. Lots of questions coming in on YouTube. And Crispine says, there is a story going around that the medicine for COVID-19 is to be tried here in Africa. How true is this? This is something I have seen all over social. I've seen a lot of that, and people getting very upset, Africans getting very upset that perhaps some of the greatest cases will be overseas for them, so in Europe, elsewhere, but the testing, the experimenting is happening on Africans. Dr. Michelle, can you tell us more about that?
I think this one is not true because most of the medical trials are actually occurring out of Africa. We have hundreds of trials going on in Europe, in Asia, mainly in China, where the outbreak started, and as well as in the US. The first vaccine trial started in US. In Africa, the solidarity trial for treatment that WHO launched, 28 African countries apply, and up to now it's only 4 that are almost ready to start because they did not provide the required documentation, and also they did not receive the required approval from the ethical committee. And I want to reassure Africans that this trial cannot be done against the will of the Africans. It's strictly standardized and organized, and you have to go through an ethical committee. You have to have the approval of the national authorities, and WHO is also looking at all the process. So it's not as easy that the African think, but it's necessary. It's necessary also to have some trial in Africa for medicine that can actually fit our context.
Dr. Michelle, I want to stay with you for this next question on Twitter, and it's from Felix. And Felix says, what about the victims of DR Congo's many ongoing conflicts? As the spread of the coronavirus accelerates across the country, they also have to focus on Ebola, cholera, measles. Dr. Michelle.
This multiple crisis challenge the response capacity, including the humanitarian response, as well as the public health response. And this overwhelmed the health system and did not give time for the health system to recover, to think ahead, like we were talking about in terms of preparedness to address. They have few assets because we had Ebola. They still have some of the equipment, some of the aspects on the ground, but the recurrent crisis destroy the health service, and it require additional support coming from outside. Is where we partners on the ground need to work hand in hand to provide a stronger response because the system is weakened by the recurrent crisis.
I want to bring in something that comes from a studio in Nigeria. And it's a beautiful video and animation helping youngsters who have to stay at home understand what lockdown means. So we are joining the video. It's done in 4 languages from Nigeria. So we're joining the video where big sister Funke is telling her little brother Habib to stay inside, because if he doesn't stay inside, he may well be infecting other people with the coronavirus. And this is from Anthill Studios. And they did a wonderful job of actually using an African solution, using African imagery, Nigerian imagery, to actually share how we as a community can actually battle and fight the coronavirus.
You will bring the coronavirus home and then infect everyone. Mommy will be sick, no more jollof rice. Huh? Daddy will be sick, no more going out to see movies.
Oh no, not the movies, no!
Even worse, the government will come and take Mommy and Daddy away.
You're just making it up.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
See for yourself.
Mohammed, have you seen other examples like that? I know some celebrities are also helping in Nigeria.
Yes, there's a lot of on the communication side, and you probably know that we live in an age whereby trust of information is not as much as it should be. So it's really important to have this kind of voices. And in Nigeria, we see a lot of messages in different parts of the country, in different languages, on people sharing what are the basic prevention measures you can put, why you have to isolate, why you have to distance. And this goes against our culture. You know, it's not an easy thing to do, not to visit your extended families, not to look out, not to go and interact with people you normally interact. So it's a huge ask. And I think this kind of stories that have been done in Nigeria and other African countries are important because we convince people that this is temporary, it's not going to be a permanent situation. But this is important because to protect yourself and to protect those you love. And I think this has been successful in Nigeria. So there are many of the superstars have recorded messages in different languages, and we've seen a lot of successes on that front.
Dr. Regina, let me put this tweet to you. It's from Takumba Mba. Takumba says, what are the plans of the government in terms of welfare for the citizens after the lockdown is over? Do you want to take that from South Africa's perspective, Regina?
Well, so I think in South Africa, what the plan is for the current relief efforts to go all the way to October, which hopefully will be after the lockdown is over. But I think that there's going to be an opportunity to review everything that has happened and use the data when we're closer to that to understand exactly what else needs to be done. I think, you know, it's very difficult for other African countries who may not have the types of budgets that South Africa potentially can have to be able to take care of the welfare of people long after the lockdown has happened. But I think the economic impact is going to be quite severe. And I think also the health impact is going to be quite severe. And so we'll have to see how we do when we get there. I think what we're seeing across Africa is that the countries that are in lockdown or some isolation are having a less exponential increase in cases, which is great. But then what happens when the isolation and the lockdown is lifted? In a place like South Africa, where we have 3,500 cases, we're probably just going to go back up to exponential growth.
I'm going to put this tweet to you, Dr. Michelle, because everybody wants to know when will the vaccine actually happen. So Ahmad Muhammad is from Nigeria, and he says, when do you think the COVID-19 vaccine will be available to the world? Everyone wants to know that.
So, yeah, it's a very difficult question. Some of the trial have already started, and from what we are hearing from different research team, it won't be before the next 6 months. Most of them are even talking about 2021. So we are not there yet. So need for us maybe to emphasize on the actual control measures, of course, making it more friendly to apply in our specific context.
A question about best practices, and this is Moana Watanabe. And Moana shares some figures from Senegal and says, you know, we've done pretty well in terms of our cases and how many people we've treated, and what best practices can we share with the rest of the world. Mohammed, from your perspective in Nigeria, are you seeing best practices actually in practice?
Yes, I mean, we've had similar problems initially in terms of testing, and I think Dr. Michel also pointed out that testing has been a big problem, but it's not an African problem, it's a global problem. It's been difficult to catch up with the testing. But what Nigeria has done, best practice, which is really good for others who are listening, is to see this not only as a health crisis. It is a health crisis, but it's also an economic and political crisis and social crisis. So what Nigeria has done is it set up a presidential task force that brings different parts of government together with the United Nations supporting it to be able to respond. Not only respond from the health and prevention and isolation and treatment side, but also to look at the economic impact, the cushioning against the most poor, and planning for the day after tomorrow. How does the economy look like? Should we have an economy that is exposed to one commodity? What kind of system we need to be put in place? And I think what COVID has done for Africa, unintentionally, is to revisit our economic system, our social structures, and what is important. And I think what we've seen is investing in people happens to be the most important.
We are in the final 1 minute of this show. It just proves that there are so many questions and we don't have enough time to give all of the answers. But if I wanted you to give me, in a sentence, Dr. Regina, Dr. Michel, Mohammed, one sentence that will encourage our audience who are tackling COVID-19 across sub-Saharan Africa, what would that sentence be? Dr. Regina, you start. A sentence.
Yes, I would say that, you know, it's something we have to go through, and it is going to pass as well. So we have to just follow the rules and follow our governments, and then we'll be hopefully better on the other side.
Dr. Michel.
I will say that it could be quite long, and so we need to find a way to detect and control, but at the same time, communities need to comply to public health measures.
All right, and Mohammed.
COVID has exposed our structural weaknesses, and it gives us an opportunity to fix it after this.
Thank you so much for being here, panel. We really appreciate you, Dr. Regina, Dr. Michel, and Mohammed, and of course you on Twitter and on YouTube. See you next time. Take care, everybody.
As coronavirus continues to devastate the United States, the race to the White House goes on. Joe Biden has all but secured his place as the Democratic nominee. But can he beat Donald Trump? Join us for continuing coverage of the US election 2020 on Al Jazeera.
On the deserted streets of Bogota, they've become familiar figures, couriers on bicycles delivering food or medicine to lockdown Colombians. Most of them here are Venezuelan migrants. Doreima Gomez, a mother of 4, says contagion is always on our mind.
None of them receive health insurance for their work and exposing themselves, and very few seem to have it.
Yet there may be a bright side. People who look down on them as unskilled migrants now say they're essential to control the virus.
I receive messages on the app saying that we are heroes. I was a nurse back home. What I am doing is not all that different from my passion, helping others.
In the far reaches of the New Siberian Islands, gold rush fever is in the air. Hunters searching for priceless woolly mammoth tusks have unearthed the Holy Grail. An incredible journey into the realms of science fiction, where cloning and synthetic biology have scientists playing God. Witness Genesis 2.0, The Hunt for the Woolly Mammoth, on Al Jazeera.
Rewind returns.
I can't bring your people back to life. I'm sorry.
And brand new updates on the best of Al Jazeera's documentaries.
In Lebanon, I was the top of the class.